Right. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Welcome to this session 4D, which is on disaster preparedness and health. My name is Champika Lenage, and I'm from Universities of Central Lancashire, UK. I'm one of the session co-chairs, and we also have Dr. Noel Vijaysekara as the other session co-chair. Noel, over to you to give a small self-introduction.
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Noel Vijaysekara. I'm a medical officer, senior registrar in community medicine, attached to the disaster preparedness and response division of instructor. So actually, I'm speaking from the emergency operations for COVID-19 response right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Noel. Coming back to the session, we have altogether 6 interesting presentations lined up, and each session or each presentation will be for about 10 minutes. After each presentations, we thought we'll take questions from the audience or participants. The questions will be for about 5 minutes for each presentation so that we can be within the timeline. Either you can ask the questions at the end of the presentation, or you could actually type any questions arise during each presentation via the chat box, so that we can take these at the end, in the sense end of each presentation. What I was thinking is we'll give first priority to the questions raised via the chat box, and if we have more time, we'll take further questions from the audience. I hope that I'm clear and you are okay with the plan. If that's okay, we can kickstart with the presentations. And also I ask you to please keep the mics muted and video switched off when the presentations are running. So the first presentation is by UGG Chaminda and J. Varusha Hennadi. The presentation is about management of the dead in disasters. It's about knowledge, attitudes, and self-reported practices among a group of army soldiers in the Galle district. Buddhi, over to you to run the presentations, please.
Sure, Madam. We will. Management of the dead in disasters, knowledge, attitudes, and self-reported practices among a group of army soldiers in Galle district, Sri Lanka. Improper management of the dead in disasters can hinder the identification, leads to loss of important forensic evidence, and affects the dignity of the dead. Thus, inappropriate management of the dead has social, psychological, economical, and legal consequences on the survivors. Army soldiers play a vital role in dead body management in disasters. The importance of their role was evident during disaster situations in Sri Lanka. The objective of this study was to describe the knowledge, attitudes, and self-reported practices on management of the dead in disasters among a group of army soldiers in Galle district. This is a descriptive cross-sectional study. Study population included all army soldiers working in 2 army camps in Galle district. Since data was collected from the entire population, sample size calculation and sampling technique were not applicable. Data collection instrument was a self-administered questionnaire. It had close-ended type questions and 4 sections. First section consisted of basic socio-demographic data of participants. Second section consisted of 33 true-false type questions regarding the knowledge on management of the dead in disasters. Attitudes were asked in the third section. Fourth section had questions on self-reported practices. Authority was obtained from the Ministry of Defense, Sri Lanka, to conduct this study. Ethical approval was granted by the Ethical Review Committee of National Hospital of Sri Lanka. Informed voluntary verbal consent was obtained prior to data collection. Knowledge on management of the dead in disasters was assessed by scoring 33 items of the second section of the questionnaire. Each correct response was awarded 1 mark. Thus, the total score ranged from 0 to 33. It was converted into a percentage. Based on the percentage of correct responses, Army soldiers were classified into 3 groups denoting their overall knowledge using predetermined cutoff values. More than 70%, good level of overall knowledge, 50 to 70%, moderate level of overall knowledge, less than 50%, poor level of overall knowledge. Data was analyzed using SPSS version 21. Results: socio-demographic characteristics. Study sample consisted of 188 male Army soldiers. A majority were in 31 to 40 years of age. 43.6% of participants had passed General Certificate of Education ordinary level examination, and a majority had more than 10 years of service in Army. Participants were asked different aspects of the dead body management. 93.6% of Army soldiers knew that assigning a unique reference number to each dead body is mandatory, and a dead body should only be released when identification is certain. A majority was aware that recovery teams should not attempt to match body parts with incomplete bodies at the disaster scene, and it is not advisable to clean all dead bodies at the scene itself. Furthermore, more than 70% of Army soldiers knew that laying bodies on top of each other is not recommended in temporary burial sites. Deficiencies of knowledge in certain aspects were also evident. Especially, only 8% of Army soldiers knew that wearing face masks is not essential for teams involved in dead body recovery. And only 34% of Army soldiers were aware that ambulances should not be used to transport the dead bodies. 86 participants knew that every body part that is completely detached should be treated as a separate individual. More than 50% of Army soldiers knew that all attached personal belongings should not be removed at the disaster scene itself from the corresponding remains. Overall knowledge. Majority of the participants were found to have a moderate level of overall knowledge, whereas 32.4% of participants had a good level of overall knowledge. Level of education was significantly associated with the overall knowledge on management of the dead in disasters. Regarding attitudes, only 21.8% of Army soldiers believed that funeral rites are not important in management of dead in disasters. 44 Army soldiers thought that mistaken identity is not a big issue to be worried in management of the dead in disasters. A noteworthy finding of this study is the attitude of more than half of the study participants that management of dead bodies of foreign nationals should be treated better than the locals. 24 participants believed that there's no need to respect dead bodies as they are dead, and 33% of participants thought that following guidelines is impractical in real disaster situations. regarding self-reported practices pertaining to dead body management. 111 participants had declared that they have used gloves and boots in dead body recovery process. 53.7% of army soldiers had reported that they have obtained photographs of the disaster scene and dead bodies. 84 army soldiers had said that they have established a scene management team immediately after a disaster. More than 50% of army soldiers had reported that they have placed each dead body in a separate body bag. Limitations and strengths. One limitation of this study is this study was confined to male army soldiers since there was no female army corps in Galle district. Secondly, as data was collected using a self-administered questionnaire, there's a possibility that participants may have provided socially desirable responses. To our knowledge, this is the first study conducted in Sri Lanka to describe the knowledge, attitudes, and practices on management of the dead in disasters among first responders. It's a major strength of this study. Conclusions. We concluded that a majority had either moderate or good level of overall knowledge. Deficiencies of knowledge in certain aspects of dead body management were evident. A majority had more favorable attitudes in many aspects of management of the dead in disasters, although there were some negative attitudes to a certain extent. And there is space for improvement in certain practices of dead body management. Recommendations. This study recommends improving the training opportunities for army soldiers to enhance their knowledge and experience on management of the dead in disasters. And during those training programs, more consideration should be given to offer specific instructions on different aspects of dead body management. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shaminder. Any questions from the audience? Whilst questions are coming, I'll ask one question myself. Shaminder, you mentioned about choosing the whole population for the questionnaire. So you meant there are 188 soldiers within the whole district of Galle.
Madam, we have chosen 2 army camps in Galle district. And they have inclusion criteria. Only the army soldiers during the dates of data collection were included into the study.
All right, okay. And how many responded? Did you get 100% response rate?
94%, around 94%, madam. There were around 190, around 200 army soldiers and 188 responded. Around 94% have responded.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from the others? I do have one more, but let's wait for the others. You mentioned within your presentation at the end that there are, overall knowledge is maybe moderate to good, and also they have a good attitude, but you do say that there are still space for improvement. What kind of improvements, or in which areas that you see the majority of the improvements need to be done, Shaminder?
Madam, there are certain aspects of knowledge deficiencies and attitude, some deficiencies in attitudes, and we have to target those deficiencies, especially regarding knowledge. There were deficiencies in regarding spraying disinfectants to dead bodies and using ambulances during transport of dead bodies and obtaining photographs at the disaster scene itself, like that. And in attitude section, there were some discrepancies, and some thought that foreign nationals, dead bodies of foreign nationals should be treated better than locals, and dead bodies of children should not be given priority, and there is no need to respect dead bodies as they are dead. Therefore, we think some aspects should be targeted where we have found deficiencies are existed.
Okay. Where do you think the changes need to be made? Finally, this is my last question. So in order to address these challenges, do you think it has to be a bottom-up approach, or should it come from the policy level? What do you think should happen?
We think it should come from both aspects, from the policy level and from the bottom level also. It's better to give them proper trainings during their the preparedness periods, during where there are no disasters, and army soldiers could be given more knowledge and more trainings could be given, and that time could be used efficiently to enhance their knowledge and experience regarding the management of dead bodies during disasters. Because army soldiers usually don't have adequate expertise or experience regarding dead bodies. Those things could be given during training sessions.
Okay, thank you very much, Aminder, and thanks for sticking to the timeline. Over to you, Novil.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chandika. Thank you very much for that excellent presentation. And now we move on to the second presentation, flood preparedness model for resilience around fluvial disasters. Zia I, Amaratunga D, and Link R. Zia will be presenting. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Zia. Okay, thank you. Over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, conference, wherever you may be within the globe. My name is Isaac Zia, a third-year PhD researcher at the University of Huddersfield in the Global School of Resilience. My topic is the flood preparedness model for resilience around fluvial disasters, and I will start sharing with you my slides and talk you through these. And so without further ado, I also confirm that I am supervised by Professors Delanty and Professor Richard, who is my main supervisor. And I also work concurrently within the flood field. I aim to talk about the following issues: the aims of the research and the objectives, and an outline of the contributions that I think are most likely to come out of this. And I'll walk through the methodology and the methods and the philosophy of the research, and just give you a few references of what I've been able to do so far. Now, the aim of the research is to develop a community participation flood preparedness model for us to assess, the threats that are posed by fluvial hazards, specifically to property like housing. And obviously, the issue is to seek the improvement of the community's resilience against flood events, which the United Kingdom is very prone to. Now, at the beginning of the year, in early February, March, we had storms Dennis and Storm Kiara, and there was a lot of devastation that took place. Fortunately, no lives were lost, but some properties were damaged. And as you can see in the pictures here, those were the levels of the water within the catchment area. The nature of the floods within this area is that we are in a steep valley. Thus, the rains come down cascading quickly and fast. And as soon as they rise, it doesn't take 2-3 hours for them to dissipate, but it's just the damage that they cause as a result. The objectives obviously to assess the advantages and disadvantages of using community-based preparedness as an approach for property resilience. We need also to identify the stakeholders and understand approaches to increasing the stakeholders' awareness. And we also want to look at the barriers and the drivers and incentives that influence stakeholders to adopt resilience measures. And also investigate attitudes and behaviors of stakeholders, as well as interrelationships between commercial enterprise stakeholders towards property community support network and flood preparedness to flood resilience of properties. Now, we need to develop a community engagement framework that can help achieve an appropriate level of community participation towards preparedness and develop flood resilient property. Obviously, contributions are what we seek in this research, and to contribute professionally and academically toward flood resilience in all aspects of communities and property exposed to flooding within the United Kingdom and across the globe. Also want to be fine-tuning and accommodating government policies and knowledge and adaptation, which is required to deal with procedures and anticipations of changes and in extreme flood events, which are becoming very prevalent due to climate change. The development of the flood mitigation solutions which are affordable and appropriate for the local community and support sustainable environment objectives and can be shared across the globe. I did a literature review and synthesized, on the issues of drivers and impacts, on the issues like excessive runoff and economies and the properties. Looked at the stakeholder engagement in terms of community risk awareness and statutory bodies, perceived responsibilities, as communities sometimes think that it is the government who has the responsibility of actually looking after their properties, when it is actually the stakeholders who ought to. And I also looked at the national policies and partnerships, and looked at the literature across barriers and empowerment and preparedness. And also looked at the disconnect and perceptions towards building community resilience. The methodology that I adopted was rather pragmatic and leans towards philosophy, because my selection of strategy and suitable methods have been necessary and judged to be used in the collecting of information, which will highlight the challenge. And I've been using various tools to get the data, and I'm aware that this data requires validation, especially the literature that has been alluded to earlier on. Now, in my methodology, I'm grounded epistemologically on the studies of the literature review that I've done, and I've taken axiological assumptions in line with the research aim and objectives as I perceive. I accept and look at the truth of nature to establish the paradigms on all the world views on alternative epistemologies and ontologies. So there is a scaling and a weighing of what others are saying in this particular area. Though I'm a centrist, I'm shying away from being a positivist, in the sense that positivists have to be like scientists who actually come up with things that can be verified time and again and again. And the question is how to verify and to prove and disprove the facts that we are talking about, according to Kuhn. Now, the methodology is rigorous, systematic, integrated, and focused. And that's it's a way of really sort of triangulating the literature review and the field work and coming to a commonality. And that's the process that I'm working towards. So I've selected, a case study of an area that I'm familiar with, and I intend to take interviews through surveys. And I've prepared questionnaires which are in the pilot stage at the moment. I've taken a lot of time to come to where I am in the sense that I have had an interruption of studies for 3 months, and that has set me back in terms of time. So as a positivist, I'm independent, and I want to remain neutral so that I don't axiologically get biased in terms of what I'm doing. And so it is significant for the interpretation of the results as we go along. And we have to argue and assume reality is external to myself, according to authors like Aramatunga, and Haig, 2007. So it's a sense in research, it's very free and, not to be biased, really. That's, I think, the bottom line there. And I'm a positivist, though, leaning to realism, leaning away from realism, and therefore I cannot achieve utterly inquiry and not be value-free. But I worry about how my values, my socialization, and preconceptions may affect what I see, what I hear, and what I record in the field. Because I work in that area, I've been grappling and struggling with that to mitigate that within the study. So my research plan has been thrown back. Though I'm in the third year, I may have to take an extra year for writing up, and just hoping that I'm able, because of my connections, to be able to get the appropriate contributions and people that are willing to participate in the research with the questionnaires. Though I actually, prior to the lockdown or to COVID-19, I'd spoken to a number of people to say I would like to approach you. So I've got a number of emails, and I have another line of approach as well, because I work with various stakeholders within the Valley of Calderdale. So I should be able, which is the case area, I should be able to get that information and underpin the research. And with that, I say thank you, and I look forward to engaging with your questions. Have a good day.
Yeah, thank you very much, Zia, for that interesting presentation. The floor is open for any questions. You can either send the questions as messages in the chat box, or if you raise your hand, you'll be given the opportunity to answer questions. Zia, I have a question. You showed a picture of floods in London in 2020, right? Early 2020. How did they manage in that COVID-19 and floods together? Or what is your experience in that aspect?
Okay, thank you for that question. The place that you see in the pictures is about 3.5 hours drive from London, or some 200 miles away from London. So we live in the northeast of England, which is closer to Leeds. And it's also in a valley, which is called Calderdale Valley, which conurbations or housing follow the rivers there because of the Industrial Revolution. Most houses and factories were built closer to the rivers, and that's for power generation. That's every time we have storms like the storm Dennis or storm Kiara, which not only affected our part of the world, but affected many other parts of England. But these pictures that I've shown here are local pictures of what happened within Calderdale, because we have a very robust CCTV system, and also a network of wardens, of flood wardens, who take pictures within the areas that they are in, and they share these with with everybody else. So I have first-hand experience of that coordination of those kind of activities. I don't know if I've answered your question well enough because of perhaps the location of the disaster.
Yeah, thank you Thank you very much. Another query from the abstract. What does CMBC mean? Sorry, I don't know that terminology. That's why I'm asking.
CMBC stands for Calderdale Municipality Borough of Calderdale.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Right.
it's just an acronym. I think I should have actually qualified that acronym. I think that slipped me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Since there are any other questions, please feel free to ask. I'm not seeing any questions so far, but I think it's a very interesting study because if you are trying to bridge the gap between the philosophical theories and the narratives with the real life experience. So that is what is really needed when it comes to community resilience. So do you think enough is being done to engage communities for flood resilience in the locality that you are working?
The locality that I'm working in is having the benefit of European funding. I mean, before Brexit and even into Brexit, we still be getting some funding from the European ports because we contributed into it as United Kingdom. So that funding is shared through DEFRA, through the Environment Agency, and through various municipalities, and which municipality I'm part of. And we do robust business cases to seek funding for defenses of the rivers, to protect properties, and to work with the communities, to make them aware of the dangers and opportunities of making their properties also resilient. So I believe a lot is being done even after coming out of Brexit. The United Kingdom itself is setting aside some funding for us to access as United Kingdom only. So it's not the question that they leave the Europe that they will be in trouble, but they want to be self-sufficient. But in the meantime, we are benefiting from that money, and we also have what we call local levies from a combination or a collaboration of a various number of councils or local authorities within the Northeast, which is Yorkshire and Humber, that goes up to Hull and up to York, and all these municipalities put a percentage of their, levies, a percentage like 2%, into a common pot, which is then shared on a required basis.
Thank you, Zia. Thank you very much for that insightful thoughts, and good luck for the rest of your study. And I hope you can overcome all the challenges of lockdown and floods and whatnot. Thank you, Zia. Thank you. Over to you, Professor Champika.
Thank you, Will. And thank you, Isaac, for your presentation as well. The next paper is by Jayasekara and Sirivardhana. It's on evaluation of disaster preparedness level of Sri Lankan hospitals in the context of multi-hazard early warning. Over to you.
Hello everyone, I am Ravi Jayasekara. I am going to present on the study evaluation of disaster preparedness level of Sri Lankan hospitals in the context of multi-hazard early warning. Hospital has a role to play at different levels. So first of all, a hospital should serve the catchment area. Then within the overall health system, a hospital has to play a major role in sight of curative of the community. So then within the social system, hospital has a major role towards the health of the communities as well. So in a context like that, disasters have become a major factor that disturbs delivering the role of a hospital. Disaster breaks down the functionality of the hospital. There can be internal hazards and external hazards as well. They can lead to a disaster. So internal hazards are hazards that can be identified within the boundary of the hospital. Then hazards which occur outside the hospital boundary and within the catchment area are called external hazards. So for a disaster, the hospital should not collapse. Then it should be able to continue the functions and provide the critical services that are wanted by the victims. Therefore, this safe hospital concept have been initiated by the WHO has become a major concern at the moment. WHO has developed an index to assess the safety and preparedness level of hospitals under the Safe Hospital Initiative. And also multi-hazard early warning is another key concept in a world moving toward disaster risk reduction. There are four major elements in the multi-hazard early warning concept. They are disaster risk knowledge, detection, monitoring, analysis, and forecasting of the hazards, then warning, dissemination, and communication, then preparedness and response capabilities. Furthermore, these multi-hazard early warning systems consist of several key actors. As you can see, health authorities have been identified as key actors with major roles. So the concept of multi-hazard early warning should be a part of hospital preparedness. Therefore, there is a need for evaluating the hospital preparedness in the context of multi-hazard early warning. Coming to the existing tool of evaluation purposes of hospital safety, preparedness, and safety, WHO has developed Hospital Safety Index Framework. It contains four major modules. They are hazard identification, structural safety, non-structural safety, and emergency and disaster management. These four modules has 156 indicators which can be used in the safety and preparedness level of the hospital. Initially, this framework was developed for Latin American context, but cyclones and earthquakes are predominant in that area. So, as we all know, the hazard profile can be vary from country to another. So the developers of this framework have allowed to adapt this framework according to the region or the country based on their hazard profiles. So for Sri Lankan context, the applicability of Hospital Safe Index is evaluated. This has been done in a form of two pilot studies. As its outcome, this study has presented suggestions for the modules introduced in the Hospital Safety Index for adapting it to the Sri Lankan context. As an example, these are the suggestions made for Module 4. Like you can see, presence of a hospital disaster management unit, then coordination mechanism with hospital security personnel, likewise. But still the concept of multi-hazard early warnings are missing here. So this study aimed at developing a hospital preparedness index for Sri Lankan hospitals in the context of multi-hazard early warning. In addition to the preparedness levels in the modules developed under the Hospital Safety Index guideline, this framework will evaluate the preparedness in the context of multi-hazard early warning of a hospital. This is a methodology followed in this study. As the first step, the existing evaluation frameworks are reviewed. So the two frameworks selected for the review are Hospital Safety Index developed by WHO and the Multi-Hazard Early Warning System Checklist developed by World Meteorological Organization. So the next step is reviewing the previous studies. Then the indicators in the Multi-Hazard Early Warning Checklist will be mapped with the Hospital Safety Index. After developing the full list of attributes, it will be verified by experts' input. Then the final outcome will be a Hospital Emergency Preparedness Index in the context of multi-hazard early warning. World Meteorological Department has developed this checklist for evaluating multi-hazard early warning systems. This checklist had been developed under the four major elements of multi-hazard early warning. So under each element, there are items to be checked in evaluating a multi-hazard early warning system. As an example, under the risk knowledge, there is a major question named, are key hazards and related threats identified? So under this question, there are several sub-items to be checked. Coming towards hospitals, there is a need for adapting the context of this multi-hazard early warning checklist into the context of hospital, because generally the context is given for the whole country. So it needs to be adapted according to the context of hospital. As an example, in the key element 2, there is a question, are there monitoring system in place? So under this question, there is an item to be checked as monitoring network established that monitors hazards that impact the country. So it have to be adapted as monitoring network established that monitors hazards that impact the hospital and catchment area. Next step is to map the multi-hazard early warning checklist, the hospital safety index. In there, we have used 3 conditions with the color code. 3 conditions are items which are not addressing hospital safety index, then the partially addressed items, then fully addressed items. So here I have showed an example. So the first item in this list is partially addressed in the hospital safety index. For these items, it should be combined with the items in the hospital safety index and develop a new item that have to be added in the list. For already existing one, there is no need of adding any new item to the existing safety index. But for items which are not addressed, there should be a need that should be added into the existing index and prepare a new list of attributes. The next step is developing the criteria for allocating the scores in the process of evaluation. In this process, for existing items in the hospital safety index, the criteria given by the developers, that means WHO, can be used after adopting them into the Sri Lankan context. For the newly added items, the criteria for allocating scores should be newly developed. So this is an example which shows and introduce conditions to be used in the evaluation process for this item. So the final expected outcome is the preparedness index that will be based on the relative weightages of the attributes that are selected from the above review. So a group of indicators consider one module. Value of each indicator is multiplied by its relative weight in a module. So each item is weight in relation to the other components in the index. So this makes it easier to identify the areas of hospital which require attention in order to enhance the hospital preparedness related to multi-hazard early warning systems. So final index will be within the range of 0 to 1. Based on the final index, alteration and the developments to be done in the hospital setting can be identified and suggested. So these are the references that I have used for this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravindu, for the presentation. Any questions from the audience? At least you can send it in the chat. But meanwhile, it's an interesting presentation, Ravindu. Can you further explain, you said initially the WHO, the Safe Hospital guideline had about 150 odd indicators. Am I right?
Yeah. It has 150.
Yeah, under the 4 categories. So how did you actually map them to the Sri Lankan context?
Yeah, actually in the current context, there have been research done in adapting them to the Sri Lankan context. What I have done here is mapping what should be incorporated in evaluating the multi-hazard early warning context, the strength of the hospital related to multi-hazard early warning. So I have incorporated the previous studies that I have which have been carried out in the recent past.
Okay, all right. And you mentioned about a centrist methodology that you adopted. Can you, what is that? Sorry for my lack of knowledge. Do you want to
That means, so I couldn't get the question.
You mentioned something about a centrist methodology.
Yeah, it's mean after mapping the based on the literature and the previous studies that have been done, identifying what are the key indicators that should be incorporated in the new the adapted index. So it should be further evaluated and if it's to have an idea about how it should be more evaluated within the Sri Lankan context. So there should be pilot studies and verification from the expertise here.
All right, okay. And any other questions from the participants? I do have one more. If not, I like I liked how you explained the three kind of critical, not weighting, like rating the criticality, and then linking it to the weightages. In terms of the weightages, like in terms of identifying a relative weightage to a particular indicator, how will you do it? Can you give an example as to how you will come up with the final weighting system for each indicator for multi-hazard early warning?
Yeah, it's like what I have proposed here is like a process for like analytical hierarchy process within the input from the expertise.
So an example, let's say, for a particular one, you mentioned you have done questionnaires, interviews as well. So through that, you identify the criticality of a particular indicator. And then when you are assigning a particular weightage, you will use AHP to kind of design a weightage between 0 to 1.
Yeah, not like out of 100, what is the weightage that should be given to that particular indicator?
Okay.
So,
all right. And at the end, what do you intend to present as part of your research? Is it the final guideline for early warning, multi-hazard early warning indicators for safe hospitals that you plan to come up with?
yes, as an example, like in some cases, they are like within the just near the hospital. Some cases like there have been lack of systems to monitor the hazard that can affect the hospital system. So what I have suggesting, what will be the outcome here is like developing an index that incorporating methods to evaluate those aspects as well, rather than going for hospital settings.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ravindu. It was very good. Over to you, Noel.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a very interesting presentation. Actually, helping a lot for the health sector in trying to incorporate the safe hospital initiative into Sri Lanka. So with that, we will move on to the next presentation. I think Anjana Ambagahawatta Nandasena. Yeah. Yes, Ambagahawatta Nandasena and Pereira.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. I am Anjana. I'm going to present about the knowledge, reported practices, and their associated factors on disaster preparedness among persons aged 15 to 59 years in MHEW area, Agalawatta, Sri Lanka. What is disaster? WHO has defined disaster as an occurrence of disrupting the normal conditions of existence and causing a level of suffering that needs the capacity of adjustment in the affected community. Disaster preparedness, as mentioned here, says activities and measures taken in advance to ensure effective response to impact of hazards, including issues of timely and effective warnings, facilitate the temporary evacuation of people and property from threatened locations, and timely and effective relief and rehabilitation. What is capacity? It's called resources, means, and strength which exist in household and communities and which enable them to cope with, withstand, prepare, and prevent, to mitigate, quickly recover from a disaster situation. And also hazards, as we know, it's a dangerous condition or event that threat to have the potential of causing injury to life, damage to property or the environment. So my study was done in Agalawatta because it's a vulnerable area for natural disasters. As in year 2014 alone, because 8 deaths were reported and over 1,000 were affected, and a lot of houses were completely destroyed according to the census and statistics. And therefore, the assessment of knowledge and reported practices on disaster preparedness were important to identify the gaps in the view of rectifying those deficiencies and Suppose there was a good level of knowledge and better practices, damages and losses were to be saved as well, minimized and saved. So this was the trend of the Sri Lankan context as from 2000 to 2012, and there was a huge peak in 2003, and there was a slightly rising trend. So my objective was here to assess the knowledge and reported practices and the associated factors of disaster preparedness among the persons aged 15 to 59 years in MHEW area, Agalawatta. And this study was done in 2015, 5 years back. This was a community-based descriptive cross-section study, which was done in Agalawatta in the district of Kalutara. It took 6 weeks, and the population were residents permanently living there for 2 years or more, and I excluded the people with mental illnesses. The sample size was calculated according to Luanga and Lame Shaw, using a hypothetical design effect of 1.5, and the finite population was used with a non-response rate of 10%. So the overall sample size was 630. Similar to the EPI coverage, the probability proportionate to sample size was used and the cluster sampling. And overall, the total number was 34 GN areas, and I used the 30 cluster method according to the WHO. And the number of participants for each cluster was 21. And I also used the KISH selection table for the selection of the participant in each household. So I used a pre-tested interview administered questionnaire, and the data was collected by trained data collectors. So the variables were socio-demographic, which are used according to the DHS, except the employment status, and the knowledge was on natural disasters and disaster preparedness, and the practices were also assessed based on selected reported practices. And the data analysis was done, qualitative data was expressed as percentages, and associations were determined by using chi-square test. Ethics was obtained from the ERC committee of NIHS Kalutara. So the results were, it has a response rate of 95%. The mean age was 37.5, and there was female predominance, and employment was 53%. So these were the characteristics, as you can see, the age, sex, education, and employment. And coming back to the knowledge on disaster prepare with a sample size of 598. Regarding floods, the vulnerability, 53% identified the vulnerable areas for floods, as well as 56 identified the vulnerable areas for landslides there. And regarding floods, 60% knew that the sedimentation of the riverbeds causes floods, as well as regarding landslides, a majority, that was 63% knew the intense deforestation causes landslides, whereas 64 knew cutting soil for artificial purposes causes landslides. And also, furthermore, regarding the evacuation plans, 53% knew that they need the need of an evacuation plan for floods. And also regarding landslides, also nearly 50% knew that you need the evacuation plan. And regarding preparedness for identify their own valuables during the disasters, nearly 40% identified those things, and whereas only 33% identified during a landslide situation to identify what is valuable to carry with them. Regarding the knowledge also, the significant factor was the GN stands for the Grama Niladhari. As a contactable person, 84% knew, and also nearly 80% knew about the public health midwife, which is the focal point in the grassroots level. And unfortunately, only 18% knew about the divisional disaster focal point as a contactable person. But I had to mention again, this was done in 2015 itself. And only 1/3 identified a safe location also at that time. So this is how the knowledge score graph and the mean score of 30.6 with a SD of 12.9. And coming back to the practices, 64% practice watching news alerts through the television. And only at that time, in 2015, only 28% received news alerts through the mobile phones at that time. So furthermore, regarding their practices, 1/3 consumed water bottles only, which is really important in the hygienic conditions during a disaster, and also 71% consumed food which were recommended by the health officials itself. So which is really significant, and which is really appreciative also. And also only 14% use separate toilets for the females. That is also like that. And regarding the associated factors, these factors were unfortunately not significant. But regarding the education level and the listening news alerts to the radio and suspected floods, it was significant, and overall higher knowledge was seen with the people who had previous experience in natural disasters also, which is really significant. Furthermore, watching news alerts to the television, drinking water, only water bottles, and using separate toilets. These were significant practices with the overall knowledge. The people who had higher knowledge actually had these factors as significant factors. So in conclusion, mostly common identified risk factor as flood is a sedimentation of riverbeds. Commonly identified risk factor for landslides are intense deforestation and cutting soil for artificial purposes. Majority of the population considered flood and landslides are results of human activities. Majority of study population were aware about vulnerable areas, which 54% for floods and 56% for landslides. Glamour Niradhari and the public health midwives, who are the grassroots level officers, were the mostly contactable stakeholders during a disaster, and only few, that is 18%, were aware about the divisional disaster focal point as a stakeholder. This is in 2015. So overall knowledge of the study population was not satisfactory. Only 16% of the study population scored more than the middle level of the knowledge score. Satisfactory amount, that is 40% of the population had previous disaster experience. Certain part of MHEW area have been identified as vulnerable areas. So this warrants well-structured disaster awareness program and should be prioritized according to the vulnerable population. And also stakeholders are to be actively involved in disasters. And the training sessions should be scenario-based and include practical sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anjana, for that presentation. I think it connects very well with the presentation by Zia in context in London, whereas Anjana mentioned about the situation in Agalabad. I have a couple of questions for you, Anjana. Now, you mentioned that most of the participants were aware about the Ramaniladari or the village headman and the public health midwives. But you said that they were not aware of the divisional disaster focal point.
Yes.
I think if they know about the Ramaniladari and the public health midwife, I think that is enough. Do you think that they really have to know the divisional disaster focal point? Because he's doing a more coordination kind of a role. So the people who reached out to you through the Ramaniladari and public health midwife, what is your opinion on that?
Yes, actually, the PHM and the public health midwife and the Ramaniladari are the grassroots level officers. So the people were aware about it. So I have no issues with that. But this was in 2015. So the 14, actually 6 years back. So the disaster was heavily affected and 8 people died. So the coordination at that time, the disaster response, the strategies were not properly functioning. So at that time, I felt the helicopters were needed, and the forces were needed to rescue activities. So a lot of rescue activities were supposed to happen, but luckily, thanks to the national level coordination activities, it happened smoothly. But after all, I thought at that time, because I was actively involved with the disaster situation also, so I also felt that if the district level and the divisional level focal points were actively involved with this thing, so the scenario would have been much easier. But thanks to the national level, no issues were there. Actually, things happened accordingly, and everything happened smoothly. But I feel currently, now we are in 2020. I think most of the focal points have been activated, and the national level have empowered them. So I think that has improved by now. Yes.
Thank you very much for that elaborate answer. You can give a yes or no answer. Now, this area has been affected by COVID-19 as well, and our symposium name is Multi-Hazard Early Warning and Disaster Risk Reduction. So, collecting back your thoughts 6 years ago, what is your idea? Were they prepared for a COVID-19 kind of biological hazard, or what is your very brief answer because of the time duration?
Yes, I can say yes. Yes, actually, our health workforce and other the workforces have been prepared. So thanks to that, I think we have been able to control this in Sri Lanka. Otherwise, this would have been. We clearly know that this is a even though this is a middle income country, but we have a lot of resource gaps. But I think our weapon is our weapon is human resources. So we have been able to develop that. So with minimum other resources, I think yes, we have developed our strategies, and we are going okay. Yeah, that's my straightforward answer. If you want to elaborate, I can explain more. But yes, for your answer.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Angela. Thank you very much for that presentation. And then over to you, Professor Chan.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the presenter, and thanks, Noel, as well. We'll move on to the next one. I'm mindful about the time. The next one is by Fernando on a study on the importance of commercial aircraft disasters and its preparedness in Sri Lanka. Over to you, Buddhi.
Good day to all of you. My research topic is importance of commercial aircraft disasters and its preparedness in Sri Lanka. I am Prasadini Fernando, member of ADRIMP, and also currently employed at Sri Lankan Airlines Emergency Response Planning Unit. Failing to plan is planning to fail, a quote by LANKAN. And with this in mind, I would start up my presentation. The contents of the presentation is starting with the introduction, aims and objectives, aircraft accidents and incidents, history of air crashes in Sri Lanka, then the methodology. I have divided into 3 parts, which talks about disaster preparedness and its importance, leadership commitments and its importance, crisis communication and its importance, analysis and presentation, which talks about 3 areas: current processes, which is followed in Sri Lanka, the obligations that we have, and the responsibility of it. And then we talk about the recommendation and the conclusion. Next, we look at why I chose this topic. Unlike other disasters, aviation disasters have an international impact and its own obligations. Also, air crashes may occur at any given time and at any location. Many enhanced mechanisms are established to minimize the damage due to air crashes are implemented all over the world. Also, we find very few research studies done in Sri Lanka with regard to commercial aircraft accidents in Sri Lanka. The most importantly, it is a paramount requirement that each stakeholders in the aviation industry and other governmental authorities needs to interlink between each other, and we respond to other disasters such as the natural and the man-made disasters where we respond promptly. Then we move on to the introduction. Air transportation is considered as one of the fastest and safest modes of travel in the world. So the prior made registrations and regulatory guidelines, which will be an added advantage for any state who owns an airspace. This study will identify whether we are prepared to face any undesirable event by considering the preparedness level in airport and in off airports. Proper command and control and also communication processes needs to be established and practiced. Then to handle such situations, preparedness of each stakeholder is required. The aims and objectives of this study is to reflect on the importance of commercial aircraft disasters and its preparedness in Sri Lanka, to study on the international obligations which needs to be accomplished by a state or as an airline is fulfilled and the current status of how it's been handled, to study on how essential and to emphasize on previous case studies of aviation-related air crashes, to develop a proactive mechanism to overcome the given issue by studying on the current best practices and procedures being followed, to develop a strategic plan by evaluating past accidents and incidents occurred and how it can be incorporated as preparedness strategies in Sri Lanka. So next we look at the aircraft accidents and incidents. According to the ICAO Annex 13, accident is defined as an occurrence associated with the operation of an aircraft which takes place from the time any person boards the aircraft with the intention of flight until all such person have been disembarked and in which a person is fatally or seriously injured, the aircraft sustains significant damage or structural failure, or the aircraft goes missing or becomes completely inaccessible. So the best example is the MH370 accident. Then here you could see the worst or the deadliest air crash which occurred in the aviation history, which is Pan Am and KLM in Tenerife Airport, where both aircrafts collided and 574 people on board both planes died, and this happened in 1977. Then we look at the history of air crashes in Sri Lanka, starting with the very first aircraft which took off Sri Lankan skies met with a crash and was a failure, and that occurred in 1911. The next is the accident where the Martin Air Flight 138, which is recorded as the deadliest air crash in Sri Lankan history, where all on board died. And the next is the Icelandic Flight 001 in 1978, where few passengers were able to survive, and out of 262 passengers, 183 passengers lost their lives. Here you could see some pictures, and I believe we are the only country that made a song after air crash, which is sung by Anton Johns, Kande Hepuna Mahawanantare. Next, we had few terror attacks, which was in 1998, Lion Air flight, which fell into the sea off the northwestern coast of Sri Lanka, departed from Jaffna Airport with 48 passengers where all on board were killed, and it was shot down by a missile. The next worst scenario is the terror attack in 2001, resulted in a major loss to the national carrier by losing 3 aircrafts, and also few other military related accidents have occurred in the recent past. However, the national carrier Sri Lankan Airlines have obtained 7-star ranking according to the airline's ratings. This ratings is mainly given based on the safety records of the airline. Then we look at the Sri Lankan contents of legislations in Sri Lanka with regard to aviation. The first act is the Civil Aviation Authority of Sri Lanka, Act 34 of 2002. Then we have Civil Aviation Act number 14 of 2010 and Civil Aviation Act number 12 of 2018 was formulated. The Air Navigation Act number 15 of 1950 and Carriage by Air Act number 29 of 2018 was implemented. Aircraft Accident and Incident Unit in investigating all types of aircraft related emergencies in Sri Lankan territory. So that is mainly handled by the Civil Aviation Authority of Sri Lanka and the Aircraft Accident Investigation Board appointed by the authority as per provisions laid down in the Civil Aviation Act number 14 of 2010. The methodology of this study is mainly focused on 3 main areas, which is disaster preparedness and its importance, leadership commitment and its importance, crisis communication and its importance. Further, I have done face-to-face interviews, analysis of previous air disasters, and referencing of books, guideline documents, articles from journals, manuals, standard operations procedures, and official. As you all know, here we look at why disaster preparedness is important. According to a study done by Carter in 1991, he defined 4 factors of significance of disasters, which is the traditional disaster threat, new disaster threats like the pandemic situation that we all are facing, and then geography of disaster, modern loss factor. In considering the significance of the disaster, preparedness holds a vital role, which is also a key component of disaster management cycle. Further, it holds a regulatory requirement to all states who owns an airspace to oblige with the international legislations and treaties as agreed in order to pre-plan what to do in case of an emergency. Leadership commitment and its importance. Leadership in a crisis is different from leadership in a time of normal conditions. It is also a place where all stakeholders gather and respond based on the scenario, individual or maybe organizational responsibilities. It needs to be circulated and see the level of preparedness time to time. So that is mandatory requirement. And according to a study done by Richard Martin in 2016, he introduced an action framework to improve the understanding of the leadership environment and the role of leaders before, during, and after an event or crisis. Crisis communication now has become an important phenomenon in aviation industry. During the Qantas flight QF32, 4th November 2010, which was an engine failure, the impact made on media when the management got to know about the crisis through Twitter with false information. And also the next best example is the Ethiopian Airlines ET702 was hijacked on 17 February 2014. The coverage appeared in social media between air traffic control and hijacker even before the aircraft landed. Most of the times, the concerned airline have been tagged in the online conversation from the very start. However, they often fail to establish an active presence in verifying or directing the information flow. In terms of crisis, there are a few things that airlines must keep in mind. In previous accidents, Spanair, one of the main Spanish airlines, had to shut down its operations due to poor crisis management. On the other hand, according to the report published by Heitzkri Effective crisis management was handled by Air France during their aircraft disappearance of its flight AF447 in 2009 and later announced having crashed in the Atlantic Ocean with 220 people on board. Emirates accident in 2018, where the state itself had control over the crisis management and the media was handled effectively and efficiently. The emergency activation of Malaysian Airlines MH370 missing aircraft, which happened in 2014, the media was inaccurate and contradictory, which brought the general public into more curiosity and made the entire world to point out the damage made by the airline. During this study, it was noticed that the airport emergency plan is a foolproof plan which limits its activation within airport territory. However, in an off-airport scenario, it will be a chaos situation if proper coordination and communication process were not established. The National Emergency Operation Plan describes the management arrangements, relationships, operations, procedures, mechanism of ensuring effective response to disaster or emergency when they occur, and specifying roles and responsibilities of different stakeholders in different disaster scenarios. It describes a time frame for actions to establish various operational frameworks in the country to achieve a readiness state to effectively respond in case of an emergency. The users of this plan would be all stakeholders. Next, we look at the current best practices or the processes followed in Sri Lanka. The main obligation is in Sri Lanka, we do not find a crisis communication plan as a state and all local media works in isolation. The handling of media is a very sensitive area during commercial air crashes, especially tarnishing of the affected airline reputation and the publicity of the affected passengers and their family members. For an example, we can take the East attack in 2019. The local media handling and their approaches to the site management and exploring the crisis phenomena to world publicity is vague and need a lot of improvement in several areas. The misleading information and the breaking news culture needs to be standardized, especially during the initial handling. The command control and the coordination becomes priority and link between each other, and prior preparedness is essential. During the study, it is found that aviation-related emergencies are not included in the state emergency plan. As a country, we have proactively addressed all natural disasters except for aviation-related emergencies and the humanitarian aspect. Every stakeholder should be able to define his responsibility in case of a commercial air crash. And next we look at the obligations. As a developing country like Sri Lanka, it is not an easy task to adhere to the international standards and guidelines. The beliefs of people and the reactive background of our culture will always be a distraction, especially in responding to a crisis. The international requirement and legislation worldwide are now changed, and especially in humanitarian aspects. It is a fundamental requirement to see how state can respond to an aviation crisis apart from a natural disaster. And then we look at the responsibility, the importance. There are multiple stakeholders who will be involved for an aviation accident. According to the study done by Cheng Wei, Testo Yang, and Weng Pong, the important stakeholders such as airline, the media, the public, passenger and economy, and the society. So according to the National Civil Aviation Policy for Sri Lanka, it is highlighted that action will be taken to implement a centralized action plan by enrolling every stakeholder in aviation-related activities. Civil Aviation Authority of Sri Lanka has the overall authority to implement standards and operational procedures to airlines operating to Sri Lanka. However, it does not clearly mention activation during air crashes in Sri Lanka shore. Then we move on to the recommendation. The following recommendations which needs to be proactively identified and to the regulatory requirements. To establish a smooth command, control and communication system, it is required to have good coordination with every organization. Hence, the government of Sri Lanka needs to establish coordination between aviation dealing organizations and meet periodically. Suggestions included increased coordination among airport and other governmental organizations by building up good relationship through appointing new committees, conducting meetings, trainings, programs, and simulation exercises. The chain of command during air crashes needs to be identified and informed. Media strategy needs to be reviewed by the government of Sri Lanka by issuing standards and recommended guidelines, and prior approvals needs to be granted before communicating to the public. Proactive media management is essential, and all media agencies need to be aware about the consequences of their publications, and these publications always need to go through approvals from the governmental authorities, especially when it's commercial air crash involvement. The existing legal documents and legislations needs to be reviewed and practiced accordingly during commercial air crashes. Like in other countries, it is essential to have legal implementation, especially of victim handling and their passenger handling. Then finally, the conclusion. Tragic aircraft accidents fill the page of aviation history. The impact of aviation accidents cause significant hazard, loss of life, and extensive cost, as well as damage to the public opinion, which also be beyond recovery. Hence, accordingly, based on the local document evaluation, most of the governmental documents needs to be amended based on the practicality. Further adherence of international documents should be a mandatory requirement. The goal of each stakeholder needs to be evaluated, and focus needs to be given to commercial air crash incidents too. This study emphasizes the importance of each individual commitment and also the collaboration with all departments and organizations who will be directly involved in aviation-related disasters. The study done through previous air crash disasters are essential for any state or for any airline to implement certain procedures as required, and it will be beneficial to overcome same type of disaster occurrences. Furthermore, we can always utilize expertise experience in the industry. Emergency management is not a subject where you need to hide from others. It is highly proactive when you share with each other. As a state, all responsible agencies need to share with each other. So these are my few references which I have referred throughout the study. And I thank you for the organizing committee of this symposium and also for the panel for selecting my abstract for the presentation. Thank you so much and have a good day.
Thank you, Prasadini. I'm mindful about the time. I can see one question by Shaminder, and I think Prasadini has already replied as well, so which is great. Shaminder, do you want another question or has the question been answered? I do have one question. And
I would like to know, are there any satisfactory disaster preparedness plans in hospitals which are closer to airports in Sri Lanka, like Hambantota is closer to Matala and Nigambu or closer to Katunayaka, like that?
Yes,
are there
exactly.
any disaster specific, air crash specific disaster plans at those hospitals?
Yes, exactly. Thank you for your question, Chaminda. So what we exactly do is now with the airport emergency plan, the close by doctors and also the medical officers, especially we have identified in Katunayaka, the Nigambo and the Kumaratunga General Hospital. So we refer the general hospitals close by. So and also we have now this is a mandatory requirement. Every 2 years we need to do a full-scale emergency exercise. So in that, all these medical officers take part, and also we simulate sending like acting passengers to the hospitals with the special escort given by the police, and that is already in place. And also even in Mattala now recently in 2020 in March, we did a exercise in Mattala. Similarly, the Hambantota hospital and also the other close by the medical officers and also the immediate, like especially the ambulances, they were all evacuated, and this has been a practice in the country. So meanwhile, the question is like when it comes to a situation where beyond the airport territory, like for an example, let's say now if we look at the history, the unfortunate event in our country is the 1974, the Martin Air crash, which happened in Knuckles Mountain. So similarly, if we have a condition like that, what are the governmental hospitals around those areas, whether they are prepared now? For an example, as a country, like this is also will go as a normal activation of disaster, like the involvement of the governmental agencies, where the close by hospitals will always be activated. And for sure, around the airport, of course, it's been all been briefed. Also, we are being activated and practiced as well. Thank you.
Prasadini, for your it was nicely presented and very much thanks for the detailed answers as well. With regard to the time, I think we are running out of time and we have one more session. Before I hand over to Noel, I just want to ask that the main author is not here. So Miss Anuja, will you be able to answer the questions if there are any? Anuja Deerasinghe, yeah. Will you be able to answer if there are any questions?
Yeah, I'm the main author.
Over to you, Noel.
I'm the main author.
Oh, sorry. Okay, that's fine. Sorry then. Noel, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Champika. Well, I was so inspired by that presentation, especially by the historical evidence. I thought that we were quite safe with regards to airplane crashes, and I'm relieved that there are no more airplane trouble these days. But anyway, it's really good that we are getting prepared for that. Okay, now we'll move on to another important area. It's on a biological hazard. Stakeholder engagement in dengue control 1 year after the major dengue outbreak in Sri Lanka. Presented by Veerasinghe DSAF, and the team consists of Carter M, Veerasinghe WMIP, Kodituaku L, Abhisekara I, Hanilaheti N, Samaravira P, and Isera HA. So the presentation will be done by Dr. Anuja Deerasinghe. Over to you, Dr.
Today, I'm going to discuss one of the most important vector-borne diseases in the world, the dengue. Our research theme is the stakeholder engagement in dengue control. That is 1 year after the major outbreak that happened in 2017. As we all know, dengue is the fastest spreading mosquito-borne viral disease in the world, spreading from tropical regions to most subtropical regions. As it causes human suffering and considerable socio-economic losses, it is considered as a public health challenge. The Asia-Pacific region carries 70% of the global burden of disease. Being a tropical island in the Southeast Asian region, Sri Lanka has experienced the dengue disease initially as sporadic cases and later on as epidemics, covering more geographical areas of the country. It is considered as a major public health problem in Sri Lanka over the decades. Dengue fever exhibits a seasonal pattern. 2 peaks of dengue observed corresponds with 2 monsoonal rains. This shows the seasonality pattern of dengue. Mid-year peak associated with southwestern monsoonal rains, and the year-end peak correspond with northeastern monsoonal rains. If I talk about the history of dengue in Sri Lanka, the first serologically confirmed dengue case was reported in 1962. The endemicity of the disease was declared in mid-1960s. The severe form of dengue virus infection, that is dengue hemorrhagic fever, became endemic since 1989. Sri Lanka has experienced the largest ever dengue outbreak in 2017 with more than 185,000 cases and 440 deaths. This graph explains the trend of dengue disease over 3 decades. This clearly explains how the endemicity has been established and how the different serotypes of the virus dominated during different epidemics. The tall blue bar on the right side indicates the 2017 dengue outbreak, and it was mainly caused by the dengue 2 serotype. The main method of controlling dengue is integrated vector management. Several dengue vector control methods explained under the integrated vector management, that is environmental management methods, chemical methods, biological and biochemical methods, intersectoral collaboration and health education, law enforcement. Among these methods, we mainly concentrate on intersectoral collaboration. Dengue surveillance and integrated vector management were identified as the mainstay of prevention and mitigation of dengue outbreaks. So collaboration within the health sector and with other sectors was identified as one of the key elements of the successful implementation of integrated vector management. Stakeholders were identified based on the evidence generated by the dengue disease surveillance, entomological surveillance, and door-to-door premise inspection program. So the objective of our study was to evaluate the outcomes of stakeholder engagement in dengue control after implementation of intensified interventions during 2017 major dengue outbreak by comparing relevant premise inspection and vector surveillance data for the year 2017 and 2018. A desk-based review was conducted to describe the premise inspection surveys and entomological surveillance data to explore the sustainable engagement of key stakeholders in dengue control. With the emergence of 2017 dengue outbreak, interventions towards stakeholder engagement was strengthened and monitored stringently by the Presidential Task Force. Each stakeholder ministry is accountable for the control activities in the premises under their purview. Following key interventions were identified and adopted. First, reformation of multi-stakeholder accountability framework, and then implementation of integrated actions via multi-stakeholder engagement. Finally, launching of widespread communication campaigns to empower stakeholders. The Presidential Task Force was reconvened in 2017 and multi-stakeholder accountability framework was reformed to intensify prevention and control of dengue through a comprehensive integrated approach. Intensive integrated action plan was developed, including mandate and activities of respective ministries for the elimination of mosquito breeding places. Regular Presidential Task Force meetings were conducted to monitor the progress of activities. This is the organizational structure of the Presidential Task Force for Prevention and Control of Dengue. The Presidential Task Force was summoned again to interlink health and other stakeholder ministries, as shown here. This is the structure of intersectoral collaboration at subnational level. The nominated higher official at each level were responsible for implementation and monitoring of dengue control activities. Implementation of integrated actions. National Dengue Control Unit functioned as the focal point of all preventive activities. Specific roles were outlined for each ministry and their active contribution was obtained. According to epidemiological, entomological, and premise inspection data, schools and construction industries were found to have the highest risk, and action towards these ministries were intensified and monitored vigorously. Ministry of Education identified as one of the main stakeholders, as 30% of the total dengue cases was school-going children. And also considerable breeding places were found in school premises, making more vulnerable locality. Therefore, several interventions were implemented and school children were identified as the best change agents. These are the interventions. Dengue school cards were introduced to inspect their own premises to change the behavior of the children. Many curriculum-based activities were introduced and assessed during examinations. Dengue committees were established in schools and given the responsibility to monitor the progress of dengue control activities. Series of mosquito control programs were conducted in the schools. Ministry of Housing and Construction was also identified as one of the main stakeholders, as considerable productive breeding places were found in construction sites. Therefore, interventions towards construction sites were introduced in the designing stage, construction stage, and maintenance stage, with special focus on the second stage, that is construction stage. Although Ministry of Housing and Construction is the main stakeholder, many other relevant organizations also involved in strengthening the entire process. Widespread communication campaigns were launched during the outbreak period to empower the community and the other stakeholders on sustainable dengue control and to instill early treatment seeking behavior. Specific IEC materials were developed and displayed, specially targeting schools and construction sites. According to the premise inspection data of special mosquito control campaigns conducted in 2017 and 2018, there was an overall increase in potential and positive breeding places. We observe the same increment in both potential and positive breeding places in schools and construction sites in 2018 compared to 2017. This graph explains what I explained in the previous slide. that is increment of potential breeding places in schools and construction sites in 2018 compared to 2017. In this graph, it shows that there was increased mosquito larvae positive places in schools and construction sites in 2018 compared to 2017. According to these entomological data, it revealed that there was increment or no change in larvae positive breeding places in 2018 compared to 2017 in construction sites and schools, respectively. So these are the conclusions we made from this test review. Despite all interventions carried out in 2017 through intersectoral collaboration, 2018 premise inspection data revealed a comparatively higher number of potential and positive breeding places in relation to 2017, especially in schools and construction sites. Therefore, it explains the lack of sustainable stakeholder engagement in dengue control. Therefore, we could recommend to strengthen the multi-stakeholder engagement irrespective of the outbreak situation and implement innovative strategies leading to behavioral impact of stakeholders. And it also need to monitor continuously. I would like to thank all the technical and non-technical staff of the National Dengue Control Unit and the Epidemiology Unit, and also all the staff of the provincial and the regional or the district level staff. These are the references. I would like to thank all the organizers for providing me this valuable.
Hello, yes, thank you, Dr. Anuja for that presentation. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, are there any questions? You can type the questions in the chat box if you want, or you can raise your hand and then we can pass over the mic. I have a small question to Dr. Anuja. Now, we can see after this big outbreak, 1 year, when you reviewed the mosquito breeding sites, both at schools and construction sites, it increased. So you would have done some interventions thereafter. So are there any evidence that with increased stakeholder collaboration, school program and construction site program, have these indices come down? It's not really out of these results here, but from your experience working at the dengue control unit.
Thank you very much for asking this question, Dr. Nobil. And we had a lot of, we implemented a lot of interventions in 2017 because of this large outbreak, huge outbreak. But I think we monitored all these activities rigorously, I would say. But in 2018, we monitored, but not as we did in 2017. Because, example, we had a lot of presidential task force meetings. We raised all our problems or the matters during our presidential task force meetings. I think we had about 24 meetings since May 2017 to December. But if I look at the 2018, we had roughly about 8 to 10 meetings. So still we can see the high number of potential and positive breeding places in schools and construction sites. Those are the main places, because in residential houses, it varies from 15 to 20%. but it's very high in schools and construction sites. Roughly, usually it's about 45%. So we are doing our best to do several interventions. Still, we can find a lot of breeding places in those two places. So what I want to say, our research team want to say is their engagement, the schools and the construction, they should think that their own place and do their activities. So we can direct them, but they should clean their premises. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe one final brief question. Now, how do you see the impact of COVID-19 and control measures and mobility restrictions, school closures, and all this on dengue control program?
Yes.
So,
yes, Noel.
how are we going to face those challenges?
Yeah. Actually, these days, during last few months, we couldn't do house-to-house inspection. But when dengue cases are reported, we do fogging activities and we did the education part. But still, we are carrying out the schools inspection programs and the construction sites program. Still, we are continuing that programs because there are no much of people in these two premises. So we are continuing that program, and also we are not doing much of house-to-house premise inspection programs yet.
For that presentation, and that comes to the end of the all 6 presentations. So before I hand over the mic to Professor Champika again, let me try to summarize in few sentences about the whole session. So the symposium that we are attending today is the International Symposium on Multi-Hazard Early Warning and Disaster Risk Reduction. Interestingly, today's presenters covered the whole spectrum of multi-hazards as well as the whole spectrum of early warnings that is needed for disaster risk reduction to be a reality. For example, Zia as well as Anjana spoke about flood and landslide risk. Then if you went to the presentation by Prasadini, she spoke about man-made hazard or hazard due to aircraft. So it's not really natural. In the last presentation, Dr. Anuja and the team spoke about dengue. Then we had in Zia's presentation some policy level aspects related to disaster risk reduction. Then we discussed about some tools in the presentation by Jayasekar et al. On that we could use to assess the risk. And then we talk about some practical real life scenarios of dead body management and how that could be useful and what are the areas, especially when it comes to armed forces, how we put their support and how their knowledge could be an asset during disasters. So we had quite a wide spectrum of issues discussed during today's presentation, and we had a very good deliberation in this regard. So thank you very much, all the presenters, for their excellent deliberations today, as well as to the organizers of this conference. And I thank you a lot, Professor Champika, my co-chair, and over to you, madam, to end today's session with your concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Noel. I think I have no more words to add. You summed it up very nicely. So thank you for all the technical support and Malik for taking notes, and all the presenters, the 6 presenters who did a very well job. And thank you very much, Noel, as well, for supporting this session as the co-chair. So with that, I think we are running out of time. So I'll conclude this session, thanking all of you. See ya. Bye.